You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
This episode of Mission Log is brought to you by listeners like you, supporters on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/missionlog.
This episode is also brought to you by Eagle Moss Hero Collector and the brand new official Star Trek Universe collection. Get Star Trek Picard's La Sirena for only $9.95 with free shipping when you sign up today at herocollector.com/Star Trek Universe/Mission Log.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 394, Statistical Probabilities.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Norman Lau. Each week on Mission Log, we study intently all the information we can about a single episode of Star Trek, scribbling through copious notes to come up with our take on the morals, meanings, and messages within.
This week, Statistical Probabilities. The one where maybe they're right, or maybe they're wrong, or maybe they're right and there's nothing you can do about it, but maybe you should anyway.
But first up, I will boldly predict that John will have trivia before this week's recap.
But I will boldly predict that you will have contact information to share before that.
And your prediction will come true right now. Mission Log is a conversation about the stories of Star Trek, so that's why we want to hear from you. Use Mission Log Pod to give us a like and a share on Facebook and Twitter. If you're so inclined, give us a rating and a review at Apple Podcasts to help others find the show. You can call us on Skype at Mission Log Pod or by dialing 323-522-5641. Send us an email at missionlog@roddenberry.com. And remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. We'll get back to trivia and John in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor this week, Eagle Moss Hero Collector. Now, John, many of our listeners know that we have an incredible love for tiny starships. Well, this is no different because we have a whole new offering, and they are officially authorized by CBS Studios. The official Star Trek Universe collection is available only from Eagle Moss Hero Collector. This brand new and meticulously curated collection brings together iconic starships and vessels from the all-new Star Trek series, including Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, and even the upcoming Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Now, these larger-sized models are at the same scale as the ships in Star Trek Discovery's Starships collection and are made of the same die-cast metal and high-quality ABS materials that all Eagle Moss Hero Collector starships are made of. They're also hand-painted with reference to the actual CG models used in production.
And Norman, we should just mention really quickly, like, what's in this collection. La Sirena, which I'll get to in a moment, the Zhenghe, and one of my favorites, I think, overlooked here, the newly reimagined Romulan bird of prey. So cool looking, the classic bird of prey. Just some great looking ships here in this collection. So definitely give them a look. herocollector.com/Star Trek Universe/Mission Log. Each ship will come with a presentation stand, plus a 16-page collector's magazine featuring behind-the-scenes info, original design sketches, and a breakdown of the technology on board. Be among the first to subscribe to the collection now, again at herocollector.com/Star Trek Universe/Mission Log to receive your first ship, Star Trek Picard's signature ship, La Sirena, for only $9.95 with free shipping. This is the striking red and white Kaplan F-17 speed freighter, captained by Cristobal Rios and hired by Jean-Luc Picard to house his ragtag crew on their search for Dr. Bruce Maddox and Soji Asha. And by the way, a couple of notes there, Norman. You and I both think that the paint job on that looks like Eddie Van Halen's guitar. You are not wrong there.
And also, a little nod to, say, Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, good call. And as soon as Picard came out, I looked at it and it's like, I want that ship. I want Eagle Moss to make that ship. And now they are. and so much more. And then after you receive La Sirena, there is so much more, because each month after, you will receive a new Star Trek Universe ship and magazine delivered directly to your door for only $49.95 plus $4.95 for shipping.
But wait, there's more. As a subscriber, you're also entitled to free gifts worth over $100, including a collector's binder, the Speed of Light plaque, and the special edition Inquiry class, the USS Toussaint. And you may cancel your subscription at any time, but I'm not exactly sure why you would want to, because these ships are amazing. Full details can be found at www.herocollector.com/Star Trek Universe/mission log. Now weighing the statistical probabilities of what's going to happen next, I can 100% guarantee with certainty that it is now time for trivia.
You're so good. You're so good. Yes, so trivia for today's episode. We have a story written by Pam Pietroforte, another great example of Star Trek stories coming from everywhere. Pam just happened to be an intern on DS9 and ended up with this story credit, and one more coming up toward the end of this very season. The teleplay is by Renee Echeverria, but like all DS9 stories, there is influence from everyone else too. Ira Stephen Bear had wanted to explore the ramifications of that big reveal of Bashir's genetic enhancements, and this was one way to do it. Renee worked on the script drafts and made some pretty big changes along the way, like having the 4 visitors come in as essentially patients for Bashir. Earlier, they had been drafted as a serious think tank whose abilities were being used by Starfleet. The episode is directed by Anson Williams. Here we have the first Star Trek episode directed by Williams, who was already very well known to audiences as an actor at this time. You probably know that he was Richie's friend Potsy Weber on Happy Days all the way from the beginning in 1974 and stayed with that show for all of its 11 seasons. Now, he didn't direct any on that show, but he did start his directing career in the mid-1980s and has worked pretty much in parallel in front of and behind the camera ever since. He directs one more episode of DS9, and then we will catch him on Voyager for a few more. Let's see, some references in the show. Singh El Bashir, not a real 15th century poet, but that was a good way to do that very Star Trek thing where you throw out a historic name with some conviction and then let the audience figure out which one is real and which one is fake. We also have Blue Danube, probably the most famous waltz of all time, written by Johann Strauss. If you're a sci-fi movie fan, you probably know that it was that other great piece of classical music used in Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey. The dance scene was choreographed by Laura Baer, Ira's wife, and was originally a bit more grand. But like a lot of actors, these actors really don't dance, so that scene was cut short. I'm going to save some other references for later in the show, but there are a good number of them in this episode. But let's get to guest stars. Well, we welcome back Jeffrey Combs as Wayun and Casey Biggs as Damar. Then we have 4 actors who really are the focus of the episode. There's Michael Keenan as Patrick. He is best known as the mayor from Picket Fences, and we did mention him way back in Mission Log 253 because he was the governor of that Scottish theme park colony in the TNG episode Sub Rosa. Michael passed away in April of 2020 at the age of 80. Faith Saley plays the quiet one, Serena. Now, in addition to a ton of guest starring roles in Faith's career, she is a frequent panelist on the NPR show Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. She also recently put her one-woman show Approval Junkie on stage based on her book of the same title. And I had to take this directly from her bio, which is on her website, because I love it so much. Here we go. Faith attended Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, where her fellow scholars went on to become governors and Pulitzer Prize winners, while she got beamed up on Star Trek Deep Space Nine and landed on a collectible trading card worth hundreds of cents. Next up, Lauren is played by Hilary Shepard, and we have actually seen her before in a very different look. She was a Benzite briefly in the DS9 episode The Ship. She is probably best known for playing Divatox, a foil for the Power Rangers in Power Rangers in Space and Power Rangers Turbo. Interestingly, she and Daryl Hannah created a handful of board games and holds trademarks for those and other products alongside her partner in those ventures. Finally, the fast-talking Jack is played by Tim Ransom. About time Tim showed up on Star Trek. If you go back to the beginning of DS9, he was one of the actors up for the role of Dr. Bashir. His first professional film credit is in the 1985 film Desperately Seeking Susan, and a number of TV guest and recurring roles followed. He was even in the pilot for The X-Files, but the scene was cut only to be restored on home video releases. More recently, you may have caught him in Handmaid's Tale or on the new Perry Mason. We may not be done with these characters just yet. All 4 of these guest actors will be back for one more time on DS9.
There is a very high probability that John is about to let us know what happened in this episode.
Prologue. Dr. Bashir has visitors. A representative from Starfleet has brought along 4 very unique individuals who all share something in common with the Doctor. They, too, have had genetic enhancements. But unlike the Doctor, they've had a more difficult time assimilating into normal society. There's Jack, who is intense and talks a mile a minute. There's Patrick, who is older but seems to have a real emotional vulnerability. There's Serena, who is quiet to the point of being non-responsive. And there's Lauren, who is seductive. Bashir is there to meet and greet and study them for a few weeks while their usual Starfleet contact, Dr. Lowe's, takes a break. Act 1. Their first encounter is a challenge. Dr. Bashir enters the darkened room where his visitors are staying, and Jack immediately begins antagonizing him. It's little stuff at first to throw him off his guard, but Bashir maintains his calm even as it gets more serious. Part of the division among them is that people who are genetically altered are barred from serving in Starfleet, but the Doctor has gotten away with it. Jack, in particular, is resentful that the rest of them live in an institution, while Bashir has a life where he can pass as normal. It even gets historical when Bashir defends the idea that some of the laws barring those who are genetically altered from certain jobs make sense, seeing as how there was a little thing called the eugenics war way back when. All of this only riles up Jack more, who lets loose a torrent while letting Bashir barely get in a word. With enough of it, the Doctor excuses himself to go have dinner with his friends, and that's interesting too. In Captain Sisko's quarters, Bashir tries to express what he's just witnessed. He was lucky that his genetic enhancements were done by someone who is skilled. These 4 have serious side effects that prevent them from being part of accepted society. Everyone has an opinion. Chief O'Brien makes light of the mutants being better than everyone else, which would make people like him look bad. Worf and Odo are a bit more serious about how genetic manipulation could spark parents to race to keep up with others. In general, everyone seems to be on board with the idea that mutants shouldn't have exactly the same rights as everyone else. Oh, except for you, Bashir. You're one of the exceptions. At least that's what Worf has settled on. Changing the subject, the crew's minds are also on the speech that Gull, yes, that's right, Gull Damar will be making soon. They're interrupted, though, by Jack, who has somehow broken into the station's communications system and wants to see Bashir now. The problem is that he and the other guests are severely irritated by a high-pitched noise that only they and nobody else on the station can hear. Bashir says he can hear it too, being a mutant like them, and Jack threatens to kill Serena if he doesn't do something about it. Act 2. Bashir promises that Chief O'Brien is on his way. Now, will Jack kindly leave Serena alone and not break her neck? He does, and Serena, still unresponsive, just walks away as if nothing has happened. The chief arrives and doesn't hear anything, but the complaint is legit, as his tricorder reveals. Patrick even has a friendly suggestion for the culprit, a plasma flow that's out of sync, and you know what? He's right. As the chief finishes up, everyone's attention turns to the monitor where Gul Damar's speech is broadcast. It's full of bloviating about the power of Cardassia and the Dominion, but the special guests see right through it. Patrick, Lauren, and Jack see Damar as a pretender to the throne who is racked with guilt, who murdered, and who is manipulated by a dark prince. None of them knew anything about Cardassia or Dukat or Wayun. They just inferred it all from watching the speech in which Damar insists the Federation meet to discuss peace terms. Bashir reports their remarkable insights to the senior staff and ops, and his timing is good because Sisko just got word that Wayun and Damar are on their way to DS9 to negotiate with him. Interesting. And Bashir wonders if he can get a copy of their conversation to Jack and the others. Why, yes, Sisko says. Wayun has insisted that the negotiations be recorded in the interest of transparency. Bashir brings the good news back to his special charges, and they are excited at the idea of the story of this pretender king having another chapter. Act 3. Right on time, Wayun and Damar show up at the station, and their first talk with Sisko is recorded, perfect for a holosuite playback with Jack, Lauren, Patrick, and Serena. They call it out as a sham right away. Yes, Wayun and Damar make it sound like they're being generous, but you have to read between the lines. Jack just so happens to have learned to speak Dominionese since the morning, while Patrick notices their body language. They're up to something. Specifically, they're avoiding the Cabral system, and this tactic is apparent to everyone watching. The Dominion negotiators look generous, but it's all about the long game with them. Give up something now for an advantage that might be years away. Serena quietly has drawn out a molecule on a pad, which Bashir takes to Sisko. One of those planets in the Cabral system is worthless, just covered in some fungus. But that can be processed into an ingredient in Ketracel White. That's a huge advantage for the Dominion, a supply in the Alpha Quadrant to last indefinitely. Sisko says they can't have it then, and he'll change his recommendation to Starfleet, except there's more. This small team has done more projections. If the Dominion doesn't get the Cabral system now, they'll attack, leading to even worse casualties. Projecting out even further, Bashir's team have deduced that the Romulans will eventually break their non-aggression pact. It's a lot to take in, but Bashir assures Sisko that their calculations are correct. In fact, their method allows them to be more accurate the further into the future they project. Sisko is all ears, and will take this knowledge to Starfleet. Which means it's time for celebration. Patrick breaks out the party hats while Jack pours the champagne, and a waltz plays for Bashir and Lauren to dance. Serena doesn't participate. Chief O'Brien crashes the party to replace the power coupling in the room, and when Patrick tries to include the chief in their celebration, well, the chief is very dismissive, which upsets Patrick. With all of them being pretty perceptive, they call out the chief. The power coupling doesn't need replacement right now. O'Brien just wanted to see his friend. And that's okay. Lauren says they should go along, as they do, to Quark's bar. Time for a game of darts. Bashir tells O'Brien that their visitors really like the chief. He's so uncomplicated. Yeah, this little bit of a dig kicks off a conversation that reveals Bashir really likes them. And he is one of them, which makes him different in some ways from his friend. Just to be nice, he'll keep throwing his darts from farther away. The response from Starfleet has been very positive. They are so impressed with the work done by this team that they allow access to classified materials about their battle readiness. The news doesn't go over well, though. In the meantime, they've been working on some new projections, and this time it reveals the inevitable. The Federation, in time, will lose to the Dominion. There's no choice but to surrender. Act 4. The news does not sit well with Sisko. Even as Bashir spells out that by surrendering they can save 900 billion lives and that generations from now will rise up to overtake the Dominion, Sisko is not having it. He will not recommend to Starfleet that they surrender because how could he? They're just supposed to give up? No. Bashir shares the findings with O'Brien, and the reaction is the same. The chief won't accept it either. Yes, he understands, and no, he doesn't agree that they should surrender. Maybe that makes him dumb, or maybe it makes Bashir more than a little short-sighted. The doctor takes out his frustrations on the Dabo table, much to Quark's chagrin. No matter how well he plays, no matter how much his luck holds out, the house will always win. The news doesn't sit well with the very people who made these projections. Jack and Lauren scheme something a little crazier. If they took strategic information to the Dominion, they could, in effect, shorten the war. A few billion deaths rather than 900 billion. Bashir objects, but Jack punches him out. Next step, contact the Dominion. Act 5. Jack, Lauren, and Patrick have anonymously set up a meeting with Weyoun and Damar, but they left Bashir tied to a chair in their room alone with Serena. He begs Serena to let him go, that the lives of billions of people are at stake, and at the very least, Jack's life is at stake here too, and she'll never see him again if they are successful. He knows that she has some sort of feeling for Jack. So when the three of them arrive where they think the meeting will happen, there's Bashir waiting for them. Jack is stunned. He thought he had it all worked out, but Bashir says he didn't account for everything, and now they will kindly go back to their quarters. On the inside of where that meeting was supposed to take place, there's Weyoun and Damar getting frustrated that their mysterious guests haven't arrived yet. The door opens, and it's Odo. He says they're not coming, and these two just play dumb, real dumb. As for Jack and the others, Sisko has decided not to press charges, even though they were this close to committing treason. No, they'll go back to the Institute. Jack might be righteously indignant that he could have stopped the deaths of billions of people, but Bashir reminds him that his plans were thwarted exactly because he didn't account for every variable. He didn't account for Serena, and she was right there in the room with him. She is proof enough that one person can change the course of history. So maybe there is some hope after all. Back in Quark's bar, Bashir is joined by Chief O'Brien. The doctor is lost in his thoughts about the hubris he and the others had, thinking that they could predict the future. But O'Brien reminds him that they haven't won the war yet. So maybe what happened has shaken them all out of complacency. Back at the Dabo table, Bashir has a new attitude. He'll bet big because sometimes when the odds are stacked against you, you have to act boldly. And he wins. Just then the call comes that a transport ship about to leave is holding up for some passengers who haven't shown up yet. They want to say goodbye to the doctor. So in their room, Jack is still mad. Lauren says goodbye with a kiss for Bashir. Patrick just wants him to come visit someday. As for Serena, she actually smiles a little when Bashir tells her that she did the right thing and that Jack will understand someday. That brings Jack out of hiding, and he asks Bashir if they come up with some new strategies on how to beat the Dominion, would he listen? Bashir can think of nothing he'd like to hear better. With that, the four beam out. The end.
Wonderful recap there, John. I know there's a lot of plot to get through, and a lot of important plot to get through. And I know we're going to discuss some here in the observations, and we're obviously going to get to our discussion points. But very first thing that I saw is, you know how we always make observations about the pads and how they're kind of static looking and they should be a little bit more dynamic. Did you notice the reflective holographic tape that was on the bottom of the pad?
Like every now and then they have a little bit of that holographic tape, and it brings a little life.
Yeah, it looked like kind of like a shorthand for a digital effect readout, but I thought it kind of worked. Yeah. And I was really obsessed with the size of that pad. That was like one of the larger pads that I saw. But one thing that I was like, maybe you could have done the take a little bit differently is when Jack trashed the pad and raked it over Dr. Karen Lowe's hand, you would think that it would hurt more.
Yeah, that...
Drawing blood and like embedding fragments and shards of glass into her hand.
And she even turns down Dr. Bashir when he says to, like, he'll take her to the infirmary. And she's like, nah, I'm fine. I'm like, really? I mean, I was hoping that in her quarters she has some sort of a medical kit, because that would be the first thing on my mind.
Yeah, be like, I'll just grab this napkin here and wrap my hand.
It sort of goes back
it.
to what we've said before on the show, which is that every time in a movie or a TV show when they're trying to be dramatic, like doing a blood ritual, like, I'm going to cut my hand. Like, no, that hurts. And it will continue to hurt for a long time. So... yeah.
But I understand like why they had to go that far, because Jack was pretty delicious.
Yeah, totally.
Well, most of the time, actually,
Yeah, I mean, look, I know we're going to get into this in the next segment, but I just, right away there are some lines that just made me go, wow, like Jack saying, people like us are barred from serving in Starfleet. And I just thought, wow, we're going to be learning about all kinds of rules that we didn't know existed up until now. And that'll be interesting. But then there's Bashir dropping in with the people like us did try and take over. Hey, glad we got a shout out to the eugenics war. Nice call back there. Yeah.
So in Sisko's quarter later, did they always have that tridimensional chess set
so
there?
it's moved around a bit on set, but we just got like a lovely shot of it there in the background. Yeah,
gorgeous.
Yeah, that thing is
oversized.
Cool.
I mean, it was really nice.
So hey, as long as we're talking about some of the references, and like I said, there's at least a couple more that I want to get to. There, but for the grace of God go I, so says Bashir at the dinner party. And what's interesting, I have heard that term so many times before, as I'm sure most people in our audience, so I had to look it up. And it's interesting to me that it isn't really known for sure where the phrase originated, but popularly it is attributed to John Bradford, who in the 16th century was a religious reformer who ran afoul of Queen Mary I. He supposedly said it when he saw a prisoner being led to his execution, but then he finally went that way himself and he was burned at the stake. So there, but for the grace of God go I, except for the last time when he did go that way. Yeah.
Ouch.
Not a good day for John Bradford.
That must have hurt.
Yeah.
Even though I don't have the abilities of the quote-unquote mutants, and I just wanted to clarify, I know that they were labeled mutants like in the episode, but they weren't necessarily a natural genetic mutation. They were a genetically enhanced mutation. So, there are the two differences, like the X-Men mutants. All that aside, I really like the way that Casey Biggs played into the role of this pretender when he was giving his speech, because that Goldacott is now out of the picture. He's obviously being Damar is obviously being puppeteered by Wayun or the Dominion.
Yeah.
But there's the one thing, though, that's still very Dukat-esque or Cardassian-esque, when at the end he said, "For my sons, for all our sons." And Zial is rolling in her very fresh grave.
Oh, too soon, Norman, too soon.
What is with it? Like, they just, like, Goldacott's like, I gotta have my daughter with me. I gotta have her next to me, yada, yada, yada. And it's just back to for our sons.
Yeah. Now, look, what I will say, what a great scene to rewatch, because, the first time I'm watching it for what the genetically altered group are telling us is happening. The second time I watched it was really all about focusing on Casey Biggs's performance, because he is revealing so much to us, the audience, now that we're in on it. And I just have to say, what a gift to hand to an actor. We talked about his first appearance way back and his evolution in the show and how he thought like, oh, I'm just some guy who has like one line and I push a button. Well, look how far he's come. And like I said, that gift as an actor to be handed this incredibly complex change by the writers is just awesome. Fantastic to watch him work in this episode. Although I will say that during that scene when he's giving the speech, I just kept thinking like this was a total Deanna Troi moment. We just need her there to say, I sense he is unsure of himself. Done. That's all we need. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I do wonder, though, we keep coming back to that room that they're in. 3 weeks in a sparse cargo room? Like, does anyone at Starfleet ever think, like, hey, they could have their own rooms? Maybe with windows. Like, if this is what they get on DS9, I hate to think what they have back at the Starfleet institution of some sort that they're a part of.
Well, again, that kind of plays into the, I guess for lack of a better term, the prejudice that whoever on the station housed them there has for them. But we'll get to that
we will. Yeah, and why didn't Bashir speak up? Maybe we'll come to that too. I really like the conceit of the high-pitched noise that only the mutants can hear, and I like Bashir using it as some leverage with them as well. Just as a scripting point, though, did it seem out of character to you that Jack threatens to kill Serena over it? Like, I know that he's volatile, I know that he's high-strung, but that specific moment just felt like, well, okay, we need to get us something to get to the commercial break and get the audience to come back. So maybe he threatens to kill her?
At first it did, but then in my subsequent rewatches to find more of the details, I think it actually falls very much in line with the consistency of his character, because I think, much like a child throwing a temper tantrum, he almost wants to be caught in his challenging the authority figure. And Bashir, to his credit, always calls his bluff, and Jack always backs down.
Good point. Mm-hmm.
Because no one in that troop of Jack and Patrick and Serena and Lauren, they don't stand up to him. So he gets away with everything. But as soon as somebody does, he's like, yeah, you got me. Yeah. Yep. You know what I really like, though? Again, with the advancements of what they're doing on some practical effects, I really did like in the map room when they were doing their negotiating. Well, actually, it was in the holographic recreation. When Damar used the screen to show the difference in the border after the negotiation, it changed midway. I was like, hey, they're doing stuff. It's not
it was subtle, it was small, but boom, there it was. You could absolutely, here's the before and here's the after. They tech the tech right there in front of us all. Ooh, another reference, Henry IV by Willie Shakespeare. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. So good, so good. Yeah, just a ton of great lines in here. I know.
Willie Shakes? Where does that come from?
Can't
Willie
even
Shakes.
Remember, but there you go. Somebody can reference my reference now. Yes. I love. There's so many good Damar moments here, but Damar to Kira, we're on a mission of peace, Major. Maybe he should get in the mood, which is just the talk about Cisco. When she says, Kira says he's not in the mood for it. I mean, just. How much better than a Cardassian basically saying, like, you better be happy. This is a happy thing. Any other reaction will not be tolerated. It
was one of those kind of like asides. Remember the episode where I guess it was Lita walked by him and he's like, yeah, I have nothing to hide. Obviously you don't. I was like, hey-oh.
Yeah, hey-oh. Right. Yeah. Good
snappy repartee there, Damar. You know what I really liked, though? I really liked when Jack changed the holo program to see Wei Yun speaking in his native tongue to find the nuances in what he was saying.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the first time that we actually saw Jeffrey perform Wei Yun speaking, what did you call it before?
Dominionese. Yes. And it's funny, now in an interview, Jeffrey Combs said that he thought it was, what did he call it, Vortaese or something? But technically in the script, it's Dominionese. And he said it's just so hard to learn because you're just getting the phonetics and you don't know the meaning of it. Obviously, when you're an actor, you're trying to be in context in the moment and the words flow more naturally. But here it's just nonsense, but he's got to sell it. So he knew it in English, obviously, but then had to get the same kind of cadence and information across with Dominionese.
Yeah, he sells it. But it's Jeffrey, so he always sells it, right?
Yeah. Now, okay, I parked this note here because I feel like there are so many other big things to talk about in this episode that we'll get to in the next segment, but I couldn't let this go. There is a huge glaring problem with this episode that normally it would go into the next segment, and that is this episode blatantly shows another reason why I have such a problem with the Deus Ex Machina from Sacrifice of Angels. And I know, because we read all of your comments and all of your emails, some people agree very strongly that was a problem. Some people think very strongly that it was not a problem, and you all have good reasons why. I still feel very much that it was a problem. And that was reinforced for me here because part of the calculation then that these brilliant minds have to make involves something along the lines of, oh, wait, we can just go ask our godlike aliens to change the inevitable outcome. I mean, that's part of the history now of the Dominion War. Go into the wormhole,
right,
talk to the aliens, poof, the bad guys are all gone. And if you can do it once, theoretically you can do it again, and that has to be part of the record.
Well, it's definitely a back pocket strategy for sure. And, for the record as well, is that, remember, Sisko did not go into the wormhole specifically to ask the wormhole aliens, the prophets, for their assistance.
Correct.
They, by the necessity of protecting the Sisko for their own reasons, and maybe even staring into the orb of time, which they created, that they had to make the choice at that time to do it. But it wasn't Sisko's strategy. And I don't want to belabor that point because we already did that in Sacrifice of Angels, but I see what you're saying here. And I have a little bit more to expound on when it comes to Sisko's decision about staring statistical data in the face.
Okay.
And making a decision by it.
All right.
I mean, speaking of which, it goes right into my observation. I really like how Sid acted with Avery when Sisko just summarily dismisses this second set of statistical data that proves that the Federation is going to lose. I mean, I always love it when Sid gets really indignant and obstinate about his, I guess it's his position here. Like, he knows that statistically he's right, but there are obviously other factors that turn this into a little bit more of a Star Trek-y learning moment.
Yeah, totally. Oh, man, and I know that we're always so full of praise for Jeffrey and for Casey, the Weyoun Damar. I mean, the Weyoun Dukat dynamic was so good, and in this episode they threw all of that energy at Weyoun and Damar. But Weyoun saying to Damar, don't be like your predecessor, second-guessing my every move. This was such a good little scene between Weyoun and Damar, but it was so awesome to see the writing take a turn to give us a new shade of Weyoun, and Weyoun able to exploit this new dynamic with his new Cardassian puppet. Because you could just write them all the same, and just kind of like, oh, okay, well, Weyoun's still doing the same job, and now you just have a new guy in this other job. But they took every advantage here to really play with the idea that Damar is a very different person, and his motivations and his backstory are very different from Dukat's. And you get all of that across in that very short scene.
I mean, Weyoun's a professional handler of sorts.
Yeah.
So he has to he has to pivot to whoever's personality is in front of him. And
he's the A&R guy for the Dominion.
Yeah, it's like, hold on. It's like, before you talk to these people, I need to talk to you first because, this is how things work here at Deep Space Nine, So maybe it was me or maybe it's the way that Colm played it, but he did a good job selling how deeply hurt he really was at that uncomplicated
totally fair
line
totally
that was thrown
fair.
at him.
Yeah.
Because that also kind of like it triggers back to when he was talking about, hey, these genetically enhanced people, they threaten a person like me, who's trying to just get by on the sheer hard work and work ethic, that I bring to the table. But if they're gifted, well, gifted engineers are going to put me out of a job, which brings up another point. Why would he feel threatened about losing his job when you don't really have to worry about making money? You just have to do the job.
You just go open up a shop on his own, and he doesn't have to worry about money for it. He can just do fun things. He could restore old cars, and I bet he'd be perfectly happy.
He should open a kayak shop.
That's
what he should
exactly
do.
what he should do.
I do love when Sid just really kind of gets into the role and really chews up the scene where he's talking about how the house always wins at the Dabo table. Because when you really think about it, that's where his frustration is. He's like, you know what? We can chew the numbers up and get to the nth degree of the most precise decimal probability, but in the end, it's a toss up, right? Because you can't factor in everything like, say, I don't know, Cisco summarily ignoring all of our data because, right? That's the house winning because of he's not in charge, so he has to appease the house rules.
For as much criticism as Bashir took in the early seasons of DS9, which I think a lot of it very legitimate, it's so nice to see when his character has some deep-running emotions and very well justified by what would matter to Bashir. Like, this is this thing where he's using his gifts of superiority, he's using his insights, his heart is in the right place, and he cares deeply about what's going on. Not only is he concerned about the outcome and the overwhelming downside of this, but just sort of the isolation of being someone who understands this among very few. So I thought, yes, again, whenever we get to see that out of Bashir, it's just so good. And finally, I just want to leave us with this line that Odo says to Weyoun. Yes, I know, I honor you with my presence. I can't wait to use that in real life.
I see the spin-off series pitch already. O'Brien, an uncomplicated man with surprisingly complicated pants.
We'll get back to crunching the numbers in a moment with statistical probabilities, but first, let's talk about something very exciting with Patreon.
Yeah, so new features at our Patreon page. You know, we don't spend a lot of time on the show talking about Patreon, but we are so grateful for those of you who have joined us over there. And we want to welcome a lot of you who have not joined us yet. Now, there is new merchandise that I'm excited about. Norman, you and I spent a while coming up with new support levels and some new sort of custom merchandise to fit that will all be fulfilled by Patreon. So that's just one thing that people can look forward to. What else?
Well, we've talked about this, and we've wanted to make sure that the new refit of Patreon, if you will, we will give the user experience that wonderful long scene of, you know, when Kirk was like flying around the Enterprise in the motion picture and seeing it for the very first time again.
For 9 minutes.
Loving me. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's the kind of care and attention that we took to taking care of these new Patreon offerings. And we want to make sure that we're giving you the content that you deserve as our supporters, and it's the right content with different varieties of what we're going to bring to you. And of course, we have at the very base level, we have our live show that we do once a month that will always be there for you. So you're going to have to take a look at Patreon and take a look at the offerings that suit you best, but I think that you'll be very surprised at what we've been able to decide for you.
Yeah, so you get those live hangouts plus the unedited, unexpurgated, long form of the recording session that we post. So you get your episodes a week in advance of when the regular show goes out. And then new feedback opportunities so we can actually chat about the topics from Mission Log episodes with you directly in an all-new format coming to Patreon. So check it out, patreon.com/missionlog. And of course, more of that content coming based on what you want. Again, check it out, patreon.com/missionlog. Now, I'm excited about talking about this episode, Norman, because I feel like there are just so many directions we could go. we could, we do our show here. We could stop. We could come back tomorrow night, and we could do it all over again and come up with completely different topics to really focus on. But wow, there's just some, like, right out of the gate, I feel like deserve our attention. Like, how does this episode square with the otherwise somewhat idyllic 24th century future? We know that not everything is perfect. Even if you go back to TNG, yes, life on the Enterprise might have been approaching perfect, but they certainly encountered people who were living under the Federation who did not have things so cushy. But there's a disturbing idea that is brought up in this episode, and I think we don't necessarily give it enough attention in the episode itself. Like, what do we do with people who don't quite fit in? Now, there are some people in Star Trek who have the advantage of saying, like, well, life on Earth isn't for me. I'm going to go to, say, a Scottish theme park planet, and that'll be my life. Or other people on Earth might say, well, I don't want a life in Starfleet, but I can open up a Creole restaurant because that's what I'm into. Cool. And they can have a go at that because all of their basic needs are taken care of in this future. What we have here is a situation where people are literally put away and hidden from the rest of society. And I'm not talking about criminals. I'm not talking about people who have done things so egregious that they can't be trusted out in the real world. But I mean, even just within the context of the episode, just the narrow actions of this episode, the first thing Bashir does is just leave them in a room so he can have dinner with his friends. And I get that we're off to a little bit of a rocky start, but I just kept thinking, like, well, is anybody going to sit down to dinner with them? When does the attempt come to really have a personal relationship with them? And I know that, dramatically this is part of the build of the episode, is they have to find that common ground. But it seems like they're really behind the eight ball when it comes to finding that common ground with all the things they have done or haven't done before. And we explore that a little bit more in the dinner scene about what is the prevailing attitude toward people who are, quote unquote, different. What kind of laws exist and how are they enforced when it comes to these people? That dinner scene is very revealing. Worf uses that very unfortunate argument with Bashir, which boils down to essentially, well, you're one of the good ones. Mm-hmm. And you can insert whatever marginalized group you want to there.
Right. Not to break your train of thought here, but
no, please.
My difficulty with what was happening here is the prejudice that comes in play with those who do not measure up to the quote-unquote the Federation citizen. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand what the definition is anymore for these citizens. If they are genetically enhanced and as children, they suffer the ill effects of these illegal enhancements, then does the Federation just cast them aside and throw them into, for all intents and purposes, an asylum because they no longer can be trusted to be well-adjusted members of Federation society? Is that what we are talking about here? And is that what Worf is saying to the point where he's caught in his own prejudice?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of different problematic ideas being explored here. And one is this question of, what do we do with the people? And you can look at them as victims of this circumstance, which was another very interesting angle to take here, saying, well, the parents made this decision for this child. That child could not decide for themselves what was going to happen. And who knows where that comes in the process. That might have been something that happened when they were very young, might have happened when they were in utero. We don't know. But that was one angle to look at, is like, how are we dealing with the results of this? You can say that the action of having somebody genetically enhanced is illegal, but that doesn't make the person who is the result of that, quote, illegal. So there's that issue that comes up here. Mm-hmm. And then, Worf again, if people like them are allowed to compete freely, then parents would feel pressured to have their children enhanced so they could keep up. A very interesting idea. If and when we get to a point that genetic manipulation of a human is that easy, does it create a kind of arms race? a competition between the haves and the have-nots. And can we look at it, the same way that, say, we look at like steroids in sports and just say we're banning it, even if some people choose not to play by those same rules?
Well, I mean, that's still under the impression of that the entire legality of genetic manipulation will somehow be lifted or worked around or be made easier to do, because what Worf is saying here is like, well, we're going to have an entire population of people that are going to be genetically altered to be superior because people can afford to. But it still doesn't change the fact that there is a pretty severe restriction in place for genetic manipulation, of which, now I understand what Worf is saying when he says if you can afford to do it, then you can skirt the legality of it. Obviously, it happened to Bashir. But not everyone's going to be able to, and not everyone's going to be able to adjust as quickly as Bashir did, because he did have a good doctor.
Right.
He said that, to his point.
And again, greatly increasing this chasm between the haves and the have-nots of the future. That's and not to say that those things don't exist now with access to medical care, certain services that the wealthy have an advantage. But here now we're saying in the 24th century, this will also be a thing, that you could have people who have the means, who have the resources, or even just the connections to be able to do this. And the Bashirs got lucky, and the others not so much.
But here's the thing, John, that still does not have at least a concrete definition of what Federation finances can afford people.
Right.
If the Federation, right, if you do not need money in the Federation to use for these types of operations, then everyone should be able to access whatever they need to access, illegally or not, because what do they need money for?
Yeah.
Right? You're trying to, you do something illegal because you have the money to be able to pay somebody's exorbitant fees they're going to, extort you for that because they know it's illegal.
Right.
But if you don't have the demand, if you don't have the need, then there's no demand for that kind of fee.
Yeah.
It's just, it's I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. O'Brien, O'Brien said he has this line, we're not talking about excluding them, just limiting what they can do. Dude, do you even hear the words coming out of your mouth? I mean, that was in that dinner scene, that and of course Worf. Those were the record scratch moments, that I wanted somebody to just stop and go, whoa, okay. And Bashir to somehow maintain his composure here, but dude, you have to hear what you're saying. But what's interesting is right before that, in talking to Jack, Bashir says there's a good reason we've been barred from certain professions, which yes, there was a eugenics war a few hundred years ago by this timeline, but very interesting, like almost a self-loathing coming out of Bashir saying, well, those things that would keep people like us down and keep people like us from achieving certain things, well, we should just be grateful for those because that's there to protect us too. That was a challenging line to stomach.
Well, to be honest with you, I actually like it that the chief spoke that line because, and I don't want to disparage the chief as a character, but he is a non-com. He is a non-officer, and he does have the luxury of being a part of this officer's circle. But he isn't in the quote-unquote educated level of these officers, educated diplomatically, educated culturally in that way.
Right.
So when he says something like that, he's actually being the voice of kind of reason in a way, because he's saying it from the layman's term. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with him, but he's just saying that, he could have said it a little bit more, palatably, but he just says, hey, you know what? What if we just, kind of like monitor what they're doing? I think is what he's getting at.
Yeah.
Let them do what they want to do, but, kind of keep an eye on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No, I get it. You can allow a character like O'Brien to have that moment more so than you can allow a character like Worf. With Worf, it's like, I just want to grab him and say, like, okay, dude, you know what you've been through, right? you know the people that you've been around before and the good influences they were supposed to leave on you, right? Okay, move on.
Well, there is a certain sense of Federation, quote unquote, privilege that's being addressed here, or at least being being used as the catalyst for this conversation, because they're all coming from from the standpoint of being the haves versus the have-nots. Seems like, well, of course that they're going to be problematic because they're part of this law that we passed, and we all know what happened with Khan in the eugenics war.
Right.
But that's the stigma of all of this. The stigma is very damaging to people who didn't have the choice. They didn't have the choice of what happened to them, and now they're living with this overarching prejudice and bigotry that's limiting them from being or fulfilling their life, what they're capable of doing.
Yeah.
And you would think the Federation would actually embrace that and try and incorporate them under the auspices of oversight committees and training and making sure that they don't get out of hand. But I think that the genetic supermen of Khan's era were specifically designed to be conquerors.
Yeah.
They weren't specifically designed to be good at darts.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Although, I mean, but that is one of the interesting things that comes up in this episode is that, okay, you can have intent with different kind of genetic modifications, but no science like that is 100%. So you're going to end up potentially with unintended side effects. And that's what we have here with these four. We have these unintended side effects. Bashir basically got exactly what his parents wanted, which is somebody who has an improved intellect and improved hand-eye coordination. Great. So that worked.
Okay, but let's talk about the side effects, though, because... Okay, so say Jack's a little manic. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
He has an aggressive disposition. It's not like his side effect is something that is like a third eye or a mutation in a sixth finger.
Right.
Lauren, by all intents and purposes, she's just really sexy.
Okay.
Right.
So, all right, bear with me here, because now I'm going to sidetrack us. We need to talk about Lauren, and I don't think this particularly needs to be a conversation about sexism or lack thereof in Star Trek or unintended sexism in Star Trek or whatever, but I will say that this is incredibly short-sighted. Look, it is perfectly okay for Star Trek to have sexy or seductive characters. It is okay for our characters to have desires and to operate in a world where there are adult and personal concerns. We think back to the party scene in You Are Cordially Invited. We were seeing a lot of potential adult activity there.
Hey, you leave Morn out of this. He's doing what Morn does.
Right. But it just shows there are actual desires in the 24th century too. This whole thing with Lauren was not it. And Lauren's superpower it just seems to be that she's sexy. And they literally have her on a lounger for most of the show, no matter where she is. So does she travel with it? And they barely ever have her just standing or sitting like a regular person. I mean,
does she travel with her own lounge?
Yeah, they're like, okay, so here's the deal, guys. We're gonna have this. We're gonna take over a cargo room, get everything out of there. We'll put in a couple of beds. We're gonna have a chair, and then this lounger right in the middle of the room. Really, that's weird. Just trust us. That's it. Needs to happen this way, just right in the middle. Don't ask questions. But see, none of that ever really pays off. So, yeah, she's smart, but then the idea of somebody who thinks that everyone wants her, but apparently nobody really does except for Jack, none of that has any payoff. Lauren is played by a good and beautiful actor, but I just feel like they ran out of ideas for the character by the time they got to the script. It was like a one-line thing. You have here's Jack's description, here's Serena's description, here's Patrick's description, and then Lauren. She's beautiful. She's in the middle of the room on a lounger. That was my mini rant. you were just about to go through all the characters.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I totally get what you're saying, and it's unfortunate that they didn't play to each one of their abilities, side effects, if you will, as they call them. Each one of their abilities can be used to their advantage. Her sultriness and her seductiveness could have manipulated people like pheromones if she knew how to use it that way, or she was written to use it that way. But I guess that's like my big issue with the way that they were portrayed, or at least labeled in this episode. They were supposed to have, they at least for all intents and purposes, they feel like they were mental patients that were brought to the station because they were genetically engineered, and their side effect is that they have mental issues, but they don't.
Right.
I mean, when you really kind of take a look at it, like Patrick said to Bashir, he said, if you told the truth, you could have lived with us at the Institute. Now, Patrick is just sweet.
Yeah.
He just wants to belong. He just wants to have friends. And he's very astute at understanding engineering.
Yeah.
He's very mentally capable of these higher processes. And then Jack said, he's right, they would have put you away. And Bashir said they don't put people away for being genetically engineered, but you are talking to people that they just put away for being genetically engineered. You're talking to 4 of them.
Yes.
So why would you write that?
Yeah. They're not criminals. Right.
Yeah. They did put them away. They put them away in an institution. They're saying that they went to an institute.
Yeah.
An institution. So if they don't put people away for being genetically engineered, then exactly what are Jack, Lauren, Patrick, and Serena doing in an institution?
Yeah, I in a different life, I want to see Patrick working, say, front of house at Cisco's restaurant. He could he could meet and greet guy, hanging out, talking to people about their food, making them feel good and welcome. He doesn't need to be locked away.
Yeah, I mean, we're not sure what happened with Serena. Serena obviously is listening to everything.
Yeah.
She's observing everything, and she's calculating as she does. But that's just like a hyper version of being antisocial.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily some type of like mental illness condition that they keep levying against these characters. I don't get that part of the episode where they treat them basically like almost criminally insane. Right?
Yeah.
And putting them in an institution and saying that, oh, no, they're genius, but they have mental issues. But that doesn't really come across.
Right.
I don't think.
Right.
So, John, I ask you this. With their abilities, obviously, in play here, and crunching the numbers and looking over the scenarios and things of that nature. So, Jack, Lauren, and Patrick provide Bashir with the first tactical analysis numbers that he can live with, that Bashir can sell to him. He's like, these are great. Let's get these 3, approved by the Admiralty so they can get more statistical data and a little bit more intelligence. And when they do that, they give him a second set of numbers that he doesn't like. And as much as Bashir tries to sell it on him, Sisko says, well, you know what? I like what you're saying, but we're going to do it my way. And that my way is going to cost all of these lives. Is going to basically discount all of your information. And as a tactical officer for Starfleet and head of this station, I can do that. Because why? So remember, he was the tactical attaché to Admiral Ross.
Right. Yep.
He gave him that responsibility to an entire wing in the Alpha Quadrant, and tactical analysis and statistical numbers and support help inform these roles. But when push came to shove between him and Bashir, it was basically Sisko's way or the highway.
Yeah.
Over the number of 900 billion lives. My question to the audience is this the Federation's mentality at this time in the 24th century? Fight an unwinnable war that will cost billions of lives, Federation resources, and fight, and let whatever happens happen. I mean, what about negotiating? What about finding a way around the numbers if they are in fact inevitable? Why does Sisko continually push the narrative of let's fight and hope for the best, favor the bold?
Yeah.
When the numbers are staring him in the face.
Right. That gives me great worry. and great pause about this, because it seems like he's just driving toward inevitability as opposed to finding a better way, finding the alternative in any of this. This is almost, the way this is structured, it's sort of like a vaguely Christmas Carol thing. They've been visited by the ghosts of Christmas yet to come and shown this is what will happen. And we're waiting for that person to say, no, but I can change it. You kind of want the person at the top to be the person who says, no, we can change this. It should give us pause that it isn't that person.
One thing could have changed the whole story of statistical probabilities, and that one thing is the infinite improbability drive. But maybe John and Norm have other ideas.
Well, John, we've crunched a lot of numbers. And I know you're not the kind of person that would just summarily disavow those numbers or discount them in a way. Because you know how important statistics are, and especially with an episode called Statistical Probabilities. But how did this episode hold up for you after you've figured out all that was needed to be figured out?
So I'll tell you this, the immediate thing that I had in my head is the X-Men. And earlier in the show tonight, you made that distinction to say, like, those were sort of naturally occurring mutations. What we have here, we have people who are genetically, with direction, with purpose, genetically altered, and we're dealing with fallout there. But I think what's interesting is that we're still in either story. We're dealing with these questions of, what is quote unquote normal, and how do we get over and past our prejudices about people who are different when that difference feels threatening. Potentially. And with this, it's the threat of information. So I thought like this was a good basis for an exploration for Star Trek to do. And I have to say, I was very ambivalent about this episode on first watch. And then I think I grew to embrace it the more I watched it. I do think that Lauren is the weakest part. But again, it's not because of Hilary Shepard. It's just because of a shortage in what was assigned to those characters in scripting. And it's another one of those situations where you could probably go back and examine all of the would have, could have, should have, and come up with something a little better, a little more nuanced. But in summary, what they've done here in the best aspects of this episode is that they've used the most interesting aspects of their characters, in this case, Bashir, and crafted a story that, honestly, it has this high-concept science fiction angle, which, like I was just talking about, with the X-Men and talking about genetic engineering and rights and et cetera, but then also addresses kind of contemporary issues like bigotry and prejudice. What do we do with people? How do we treat people who aren't like us? How do we get past this sort of knee-jerk reaction that there is some danger there? And by looking at it that way, well, gosh, it's almost like using an old formula of Star Trek. We take a high-minded, high-concept science idea, and then we put it in the dramatic action of our characters, and then we also get to look at an important social issue as well. I think it works. I think it's a good episode. There's just a lot of stuff we have to get past in this episode as well to make it hold up. We have to get past the weaknesses in our guest characters, and we really have to figure out what's going on with Sisko here and how we feel about him by the end. Bashir is the one who has the change. Bashir is the one who has this realization, and he is great in that moment. And he understands why, and he's able to explain it particularly to Jack. It's too bad that he doesn't get across to others in that way as well. But I think it's good. I think it's a very strong episode. It's strong because its positive merits outweigh its negative issues, and there are issues. What about you, Norman?
Well, I felt very much like you at the start. I wasn't really sure about this episode, and I think maybe it's because at first blush, I wasn't really gelling with the Jack character, and I think Tim Ransom's a very good actor. I just thought that Jack's little, like his persona was just a little too cartoonish for me, a little too aggravated, a little too over the top. But I did let his performance settle, and I kind of got past that. And I was able to see this episode, after subsequent viewings as we do for our show, what the episode was really trying to say. And to be honest with you, as many critiques as I've levied against the show, it's my favorite episode of season 6 so far. Because for me, it returns the narrative of Star Trek back to a very basic and ethical story, like you were talking about. It's the rights of these 4 individuals, Jack, Lauren, Patrick, and Serena. They all played a significant role as analysts, even though that their kind, if you will, their mutant kind, is in many ways still held in a certain type of bigoted regard, prejudiced regard. But they did service the Federation, and they gave them the information that Cisco needed to make calculated decisions up to a point. But I also love how, not necessarily how Khan plays into it from a space seed perspective, but how Spock's declaration of what he said about Khan echoes in this episode, where Spock said superior ability breeds superior ambition. And we did hint at this a little bit when Bashir said, it's not our place to decide who lives and who dies. We're not gods. Jack said, maybe not, but we're the next best thing. And Bashir said, can you hear yourself? That's precisely the kind of thinking that makes people afraid of us. Yeah. But the issue with that, how it's wrapped up in this episode, is that they try and couch it in a not so direct way of being a mentally ill person based on the genetic manipulation. Yeah. The issue with the mental instability or their side effects doesn't ring true for me, because we don't really see their quirks, like Lauren's sultriness and Serena's quietness and Jack's obviously his agitation. They're not really written or performed as serious mental issues because of what happened with the genetic manipulation. Now, do they need oversight if they were ever reintroduced into Federation society? Absolutely. Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that they should be deprived of living a fuller life. And I wish they went into that a little bit more.
Here. So that brings us to try to figure out what the messages are. And like I said previous, and I think in our last segment, it's an episode that you can slice in many ways and try to find many thoughts, maybe not, a hit you on the head moment, but there are definitely a lot of ideas going on here. And I really came away with 2 that I thought were specifically important to how we examined this episode. So the first one is that I kept thinking about Cisco's line at dinner, where he says, in regards to this idea of banning genetically engineered people from certain professions or certain areas of society. And he says, it's not quite fair, but even so, it seemed like a good way to discourage genetic tampering. And what he means is that the solution of banning mutants from certain places or jobs would discourage parents to have their children enhanced. So what is the part that we're actually concerned about? Is it the genetic tampering, or the unfair advantage that some people would have, or the bad nature of over-ambitious parents? What about the parents who genuinely want to, quote-unquote, correct what could otherwise be a debilitating condition for a child? Are there exceptions for that? And this is partly why I like this episode a lot. There's less of a moral lesson about any of this and more the difficult contemplation about what the rules are really meant to do and whether or not they're actually working. Because we're dealing with the aftermath of these decisions in, I would say, a really inappropriate way, particularly for our enlightened 24th century Federation and Starfleet. And we're doing so in the context of a story where the well-being of people is first and foremost. And look, that's just the genetic manipulation plot. Now we get to move on to the other the other wonderfully fascinating part of this episode, which is another conundrum. Do you sit by and accept what looks like fate, or do you keep doing what you feel compelled to do because it's right? I freaking love this. And it's parallel to the message that we sometimes pick up from the Mirror Universe episodes. Yeah, the odds are against you. But at the end of the day, what is your personal and moral obligation to your principles and to the people around you? Will you give up? Or will you keep working for what is just? Because the attempt to do what is just is as important as the outcome. Bashir says regarding Serena, one person changed the course of history. And that is so freaking Star Trek, it hurts. Mm-hmm. What else? What else do we got here, Norman?
Well, one of the things that I've been grappling with when I was trying to find the morals and meanings and messages is, why is Bashir the exception here? Because he was better at hiding his abilities? Because he was a doctor? He went through the program of Starfleet Medical? Because his family cut a deal? If Julian wasn't an officer, if he wasn't a doctor, if he wasn't protected by the Federation, would he have been put in the same institute as well? Much to Jack and Patrick's, dialogue earlier. The question is, how many more well-adjusted, genetically engineered beings, and I say that with quotes, are out there who are in fact using their abilities just enough, like Bashir has been doing, to fly under the radar, but still have the advantages over other normal people, which is what O'Brien was saying before. So I think I landed with this entire episode proves how worthy that, say, Jack and Patrick and Serena and Lauren are actually to serve in Starfleet or to serve in the Federation.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Because under Bashir's care, they proved how valuable they are. But the thing is that during this entire episode, all Starfleet was doing, or the Federation, let me make that distinction, all the Federation was doing, and Sisko to some degree, were exploiting these talents, exploiting the talents of people who don't have the representation of being recognized by the very government that is using their talents indiscriminately. Yes, let's be fair. They do turn at the end because that's just what Jack was leading them to do. Their superior ambition was, leading him that path. But they did try and provide the right solution, even though it wasn't the optimal solution. And with proper support and oversight, don't you think that they could have become the valued members of the Federation that Starfleet needed to help them win this war?
Yeah,
but in
absolutely.
the end...
I say absolutely, and that is sort of one of those really uncomfortable parts of this episode, is that you see and hear constantly how they have just been cast aside.
Now, in the end for me, what didn't really sit well was Bashir, not betrayed, but he kind of turned a blind eye to his oath of do no harm, because with the knowledge that he had, and capitulating to Sisko's more fortune favors the bold mentality, he would rather trust in the chance of one person changing the course of the future. And that's a good point, John, that you made. But I don't understand why it has to be one or the other, why they have to be polarizing ideas. Because I think there should have been at least a compromise between Bashir's data and Sisko's tactical analysis of that data. I'm not going to let him off the hook for that. I will not.
No, and you shouldn't. Yeah.
Because they build his character up to be a tactician. So use that data to try and minimize these projected casualties instead of Sisko just overruling Bashir because I said so. I'm going to quote him. This is what Sisko says, I don't care if the odds are against us. If we're going to lose, then we're going to go down fighting so that when our descendants someday rise up against the Dominion, they'll know what they're made of. He's already accepting the fact that they will lose, but they're going to go down swinging. Does that make any sense to you? I keep forgetting that they write Sisko as being this brilliant tactician. And statistics are they're the information that inform tactics. So in the end, Sisko made the wrong decision and dismisses Bashir totally. And I'm having really, really tremendous difficulty with his choices as the leader of this crew.
Yeah. I think, we see Sisko make a big mistake which is to not understand that the answer to that incomplete or maybe unpleasant information is more and better information rather than censoring or disregarding it outright. It's a really unfortunate characteristic to have in a leader who should be admirable in every way. It's a bit of a disturbing thing to see.
I mean, I understand that captains, obviously, they operate under a certain amount of pride in their command, pride in understanding that they believe what is best for their crew, what is best for their command and their, and the people that are involved. But they always do so in a very measured way, where they take all of the information in front of them and disseminate it and ingest it and internalize it and weigh every option and then make a measured decision with that pride as, say, a tiebreaker.
Yeah.
Saying, you know what, I understand what's going on, but I still have to make the command decision. It's my responsibility. This is, I think, the best course of action based on everything that I've seen. That's the kind of decision that I want Sisko to make, as opposed to, let's fly into a wormhole and see what happens. Because
this was not it.
Yeah.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment, executive producer Rod Roddenberry. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is missionlogpodcast.com. If you'd like to support Mission Log directly, give us a look at patreon.com/missionlog. And for more Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, the magnificent Ferengi.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers Adam Brusky, Homer Frizzell, and Mike Schabel. I hear you wondering, how do you get surprisingly complicated pants? Have a conversation with Garrick while he's letting out the waste. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.